A quiet diner, a soldier haunted by the past. But when two boys burst in, their laughter hiding the weight of what's to come, they ask a question that stops him cold. "Did you know our daddy?" He freezes. Their father's memory is the truth he spent years running from, a sacrifice that saved his life but cost another. Now the past is knocking at his door. What did these boys unknowingly uncover? And can this soldier face the family of the man who gave everything for him? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights of the Waffle House buzzed softly overhead, casting a harsh glow on Warren Carter's weathered face. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows in an endless rhythm, matching the hollow feeling in his chest. His coffee sat untouched, a dark pool reflecting his tired eyes, while the night pressed against the windows like a heavy curtain. Warren's fingers traced the edge of his worn U.S. Army jacket, the fabric smooth from years of wear but still maintaining its dignified appearance. He'd taken care of it, just as he'd been trained to take care of everything in the service, everything except what mattered most. "Sir?" The gentle voice belonged to Rosa Parker, the waitress who'd been watching him with concerned eyes for the past hour. Her name tag gleamed under the harsh lighting, and her kind face was etched with worry lines. "Are you sure you're all right?" Warren managed a slight nod, his throat tight. "I'm fine, ma'am, thank you." The words came out rough, barely above a whisper. Rosa lingered for a moment longer, her pen poised above her order pad, though they both knew he wouldn't be ordering anything else. "Well, if you need anything." She let the sentence trail off before moving away, her shoes making soft, squeaking sounds on the linoleum floor. In the relative solitude of his corner booth, Warren's fingers found the folded photograph in his jacket pocket. The edges were worn soft, like old currency that had passed through too many hands. But this was different. This had only passed through his hands countless times, yet he couldn't bring himself to unfold it tonight. He knew what he'd see if he did. Anthony Williams's face forever frozen in that last photo they'd taken together. The memory ambushed him without warning, the crack of gunfire, the screaming, the look in Anthony's eyes before. Warren's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles turning white as he fought against the tide of memories. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the rain too loud, the air too thick. "Your plate's getting cold," Rosa's voice cut through his spiral. She stood there with a fresh pot of coffee, concern evident in her gentle features. "I could heat it up for you, no trouble at all." Warren looked down at the untouched waffle on his plate, the butter long since melted and absorbed into the cold squares. He shook his head slowly. "No, thank you." The words felt heavy in his mouth like stones. Rosa set down the coffee pot and slid into the opposite booth, her actions slow and deliberate, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "You know, sometimes it helps to talk about it. I've seen that look before. My brother had it when he came back from overseas." Warren's eyes flickered to her face, then back to the table. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady drumming of rain and the distant clink of dishes from the kitchen. This was his life now, seeking shelter in 24-hour diners, surrounded by the white noise of strangers' lives, trying to outrun memories that followed him like shadows. With a slight tremor in his hand, Warren pushed the plate away. The food had never been the point. He came here night after night because the alternative was sitting alone in his apartment, where the silence screamed and the darkness pressed in too close. Here, at least, the fluorescent lights kept the shadows at bay, even if they couldn't touch the darkness he carried inside. The morning sun crept through dusty blinds, casting thin stripes of light across Warren Carter's face as he stirred on his threadbare couch. His neck ached from another night of fitful sleep, the cushions offering little comfort to his tall frame. The apartment around him was a testament to his temporary state of mind. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, most still sealed with packing tape, as if he couldn't commit to making this space a real home. Warren's eyes drifted to the coffee table where his dog tags lay tangled beside a worn photograph. The metal tags caught the morning light, the stamped letters of his name and service number still clearly visible despite years of wear. But it was the photograph that drew his attention, like a magnet pulling at his core. His unit stood proud in their combat gear, arms around each other's shoulders, faces bright with determination and brotherhood. And there, in the center, Anthony Williams smiled that easy smile of his, the one that could lift everyone's spirits even in the darkest moments. Warren's jaw tightened as he stared at Anthony's face, his teeth grinding together as emotion welled up in his throat. His vision blurred, and suddenly he wasn't in his apartment anymore. The memory hit him like a physical blow, hot air thick with dust, the rapid pop of gunfire, shouts echoing off mud brick walls. Their unit had walked right into it, an ambush in a seemingly quiet village. Warren remembered the weight of his rifle, the sweat trickling down his back, the thundering of his heart. "Carter!" Anthony's voice cut through the chaos. "On your 3!" But Warren couldn't move. His muscles locked, his finger frozen on the trigger as the enemy fighter emerged from a doorway. Time seemed to slow, stretch, become syrup thick. He saw the barrel of the AK-47 rising, heard the deafening crack of gunfire, but his body refused to respond. Then Anthony was there, shoving him hard to the side. The impact of bullets meant for Warren thudded into Anthony's chest instead. Warren watched in horror as his friend's body jerked, his weapon clattering to the ground. Anthony's eyes met his for one eternal moment, filled not with accusation but with something worse. Acceptance. "No!" Warren's voice tore from his throat as the memory released him. He found himself standing in his apartment, chest heaving, hands trembling. Sweat dampened his t-shirt despite the cool morning air. He paced the small living room, trying to steady his breathing, trying to push away the image of Anthony's final moments. The photograph still lay on the coffee table, Anthony's smile now seeming to mock him. Warren picked it up with shaking fingers, his thumb brushing over his friend's face. "I'm sorry, Anthony," he whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. "God, I'm so sorry." The walls of the apartment suddenly felt too close, too confining. Warren grabbed his jacket from where it hung on a kitchen chair, shrugging it on with jerky movements. He needed to get out, needed air, needed something to dull the sharp edges of his memories. Coffee would do for now, though he knew from experience it wouldn't be enough. As he pulled open his apartment door, the guilt followed him like a shadow, an ever-present companion he couldn't shake. It would trail him to whatever coffee shop he found, sit with him while he stared into his cup, remind him with every breath that he was here and Anthony wasn't. The afternoon sun fought a losing battle with heavy clouds, as Warren hunched over his coffee at the Waffle House. The familiar booth had become his sanctuary, its worn vinyl seats and the steady hum of fluorescent lights offering a predictable comfort. Rosa, the waitress who'd shown him kindness during his late-night visits, kept his cup filled without pressing him to talk. The bell above the door chimed, shattering the quiet atmosphere. 2 young boys burst in, their sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. "Pancakes are better," the younger one declared, his voice filling the restaurant. "They're softer." "No way," the older boy countered, shaking his head. "Waffles have squares to hold more syrup. That's just science, Jaden." Warren's shoulders tensed at the sudden noise. He gripped his coffee cup tighter, trying to maintain his invisible barrier against the world. But the boy's energy was impossible to ignore, their joy and innocence filling the space like sunshine after a storm. The younger boy, Jaden, practically bounced up to the counter where Rosa stood with her order pad. His dark eyes sparkled with excitement as he launched into an elaborate explanation of why chocolate chip pancakes were superior to plain ones. His brother, more reserved but still smiling, stood beside him, occasionally rolling his eyes at his siblings' enthusiasm. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customers," Rosa said warmly. "Malik, keeping your little brother in line?" Malik nodded, a proud big brother smile crossing his face. "Trying to, Miss Rosa." Warren watched from behind his coffee cup, something in his chest aching at their easy happiness. Then Jaden's attention shifted, his curious gaze landing on Warren's military jacket. Before anyone could stop him, the boy bounded over to Warren's booth, his sneakers lighting up with each step. "Hey, mister." Jaden's smile was wide and genuine. "Are you a soldier?" Warren's throat tightened. He glanced at Malik, who had followed his brother more slowly, hanging back with cautious interest. The older boy's watchful expression reminded Warren of soldiers he'd known, always alert, always assessing. I was, Warren managed, his voice rough from disuse. Jaden's eyes grew wider. Our daddy was a soldier too. His name is Anthony Williams. Do you know him? The name hit Warren like a physical blow. His hands began to shake, coffee sloshing in his cup. The faces before him blurred. These were Anthony's boys. The same dark eyes, the same quick smile. His friends' children stood before him, innocent and unaware that they were speaking to the man responsible for their father's death. Rosa watched from behind the counter, concern etched on her face. She took a step forward, perhaps sensing Warren's distress, but stopped short of intervening. Warren couldn't meet their eyes. His tongue felt like lead in his mouth. I served overseas, he mumbled, the words tasting like ash. The boys exchanged glances, Jaden's enthusiasm dimming slightly at Warren's obvious discomfort. Malik put a hand on his brother's shoulder, gently pulling him back. Come on, Jay, Malik said quietly, let's go order. They returned to their table, Jaden's voice already rising again as he resumed the great Waffle debate. But Warren sat frozen, his coffee forgotten, his mind a tornado of memories and guilt. Anthony's face floated before him. Not the horrible final moments, but the proud way he'd always talked about his sons. Now here they were, flesh and blood reminders of everything Warren had failed to protect. The bell above the door chimed again, and Warren's world shifted on its axis. A woman in her mid-30s entered, her dark hair slightly damp from the drizzle outside. She carried herself with quiet grace, though exhaustion lined her face. This was Erica Williams, though Warren didn't know it yet. She smiled when she spotted her sons, but her eyes quickly found Warren, noticing how Jaden still hovered near his table. Boys, she called out, her voice gentle but firm. Are you bothering this gentleman? She approached Warren's booth and he could feel his heartbeat thundering in his chest. Up close, she had Anthony's same kind eyes, the same way of looking at people like she could see right through them. I'm so sorry if they were disturbing you, Erica said, placing a hand on Jaden's shoulder. They get excited whenever they meet someone from the service. Their father. Her voice softened slightly. Well, they're always hoping to meet someone who knew him. Warren's fingers went numb around his coffee cup. He forced his face to remain neutral, but inside, panic clawed at his throat. These weren't just any soldier's children. They were Anthony's. This wasn't just any widow. She was Anthony's Erica, the one he'd talked about during late-night watches, the one whose photos he'd proudly shown everyone in their unit. It's fine, Warren managed, the words barely audible. They moved to a nearby booth, but they were still close enough that Warren could hear everything. Erica helped Jaden with his menu, while Malik sat quietly, stealing glances at Warren's uniform. You know, Erica said, looking up briefly, my husband Anthony served overseas too. Were you ever stationed in Afghanistan? The question hung in the air like smoke. Warren's face drained of color, and his hands began to shake so badly he had to put his coffee cup down. Rosa appeared with a fresh pot, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. She lingered nearby as if sensing the mounting tension. Mama, can I get chocolate chips in my pancakes? Jaden asked, completely oblivious to Warren's distress. We'll see, sweetie, Erica replied, but her attention was still partially on Warren, waiting for his response. Warren's throat worked, but no words came out. The walls of the Waffle House seemed to close in around him. Here was Anthony's family, the wife he'd left behind, the sons who would grow up without their father, all because Warren had frozen in that crucial moment. He stood up abruptly, his movement so sudden that his coffee cup rattled in its saucer. Excuse me, he mumbled, barely meeting Erica's surprised expression. She offered a polite smile, already turning back to her children, likely assuming he was just another busy veteran with places to be. Warren practically stumbled toward the door, pushing it open with more force than necessary. The cool drizzle hit his face as he stood just outside, gulping in air like a drowning man. His hands were braced against the brick wall, his chest heaving with each desperate breath. He'd never prepared for this, never imagined he'd come face to face with them. Anthony's family had been an abstract concept, a source of guilt in his nightmares. But now they were real. Two energetic boys with their father's smile, a graceful widow carrying on with quiet strength, all of them unaware that they were sharing space with the man who had failed to save their world. Later that evening, Warren paced his dimly lit apartment, his mind replaying the encounter at the Waffle House over and over. Erica's gentle voice echoed in his thoughts, mixing with older memories of Anthony speaking about his family during quiet moments between missions. The small kitchen table was cluttered with a half-eaten sandwich he couldn't finish, his appetite gone. His restless movements brought him to a stack of boxes in the corner. Warren's hands trembled as he opened one marked "Personal" in hasty black marker. Inside, beneath a layer of old photos and papers, lay a cream-colored envelope. Anthony's familiar handwriting spelled out, "To be delivered to my family if—" Warren couldn't read the rest. He never had. The envelope was slightly wrinkled at the corners, but otherwise pristine, unchanged since the day Anthony had pressed it into his hands with a serious look. "Just in case," he'd said. Warren ran his thumb across the sealed flap, feeling the weight of unspoken words inside. But like every other time he'd held it, he couldn't bring himself to open it. The letter wasn't meant for him anyway. It was for Erica and the boys. His chest tightened as he carefully placed it back in the box, his burden feeling heavier than ever. The next morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through gray clouds. Warren pushed through the door of the Waffle House earlier than usual, hoping to claim his quiet corner before there was any chance of running into Anthony's family. The familiar bell chimed above his head, and Rosa looked up from wiping down the counter. "Morning, hun," she said, already reaching for the coffee pot. "You're here bright and early." Warren slid into his usual booth, shoulders hunched. "Just coffee, thanks." Rosa poured him a steaming cup, hovering a moment longer than necessary. "You doing okay? You left in quite a hurry yesterday." "I'm fine," Warren muttered, his eyes fixed on the dark liquid. He couldn't handle Rosa's concerned gaze, couldn't risk her seeing through his carefully constructed walls. Every few minutes his eyes darted to the door, checking for any sign of Erica or the boys. He picked up an abandoned newspaper from the next booth, holding it like a shield. The words blurred together, unread, as his mind kept wandering to Jaden's innocent question about his father and Malik's watchful eyes. The bell chimed again and Warren's heart nearly stopped. There they were, Erica guiding her sons through the door, her hand gentle on Jaden's shoulder as he bounced with morning energy. Malik followed, more subdued but still smiling about something his brother had said. Warren ducked lower behind his newspaper, his coffee growing cold. They weren't here for him, he knew that. They were just a family getting breakfast, living their lives. But every laugh from Jaden, every quiet word from Malik, every gentle reminder from Erica, they all twisted something deep in Warren's chest. He could hear them settling into a booth across the restaurant, Jaden's voice carrying as he debated between chocolate chip and blueberry pancakes. Warren's hands crumpled the edges of his newspaper. He wanted to disappear, to become invisible. Every moment in their presence felt like judgment, though they had no idea who he was or what he'd done. Keeping his head down, Warren fumbled for his wallet. He pulled out enough cash to cover his coffee and then some, sliding it onto the table. With careful movements, he stood and made his way to the door, taking the long way around to avoid passing near their booth. He couldn't bear to make eye contact, couldn't risk them seeing something in his face that might give him away. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds when Warren returned to the Waffle House. He'd spent hours walking aimlessly through the neighborhood, trying to clear his head, before hunger and habit drew him back. As he pushed open the door, the familiar bell chimed, but the scene before him wasn't what he expected. Malik and Jaden were perched at the counter, their school bags dropped carelessly at their feet. They sat on the tall stools, sharing what looked like the last bites of apple pie while Rosa wiped down nearby surfaces with a warm smile. Through the window, Warren could see Erica pacing outside, phone pressed to her ear. Before he could retreat, Jaden spotted him. The young boy's face lit up with recognition, and he raised his hand in a tentative wave. Malik, more reserved, offered a slight nod. Warren froze, his hand still on the door handle, but something in their innocent expressions made him stay. "Hi, Mr. Soldier," Jaden called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty restaurant. Warren managed a weak smile and took a few steps inside, choosing a spot at the counter that left 2 empty seats between him and the boys. Malik reached into his backpack, pulling out something that made Warren's throat tighten. A set of dog tags, the metal catching the afternoon light. "We found these in Mom's old box," Malik said, his voice quiet but clear. "They were our dad's. Do you know what all these numbers mean?" Warren's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the tags. He could almost feel the weight of his own set back home, could picture Anthony wearing these very tags. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on the present moment. They're dog tags," he said, his voice hollow but steady. "Every soldier wears them. They tell people who you are, in case—" He paused, carefully choosing his words. "They have important information about the soldier, blood type, religion, identification numbers." Jaden scooted one stool closer, eyes wide with curiosity. "Did you have some too?" Warren nodded slowly. "Every one of us did. Still have mine." "Dad was really brave," Malik said, running his thumb over the embossed letters. "Mom says he saved people." The words hit Warren like a physical blow, but he managed to keep his expression neutral. That's what soldiers do," he managed to say. The bell chimed again as Erica stepped back inside, slipping her phone into her purse. She paused, taking in the scene. Her boys engaged in conversation with Warren, Rosa watching protectively from nearby. Instead of concern, her face showed a gentle warmth. "Thank you," she said softly to Warren, "for explaining that to them. They have so many questions and sometimes—" She trailed off, but her smile remained. Warren stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled. This time there was no need to rush out in panic. The weight in his chest was still there. It might always be. But something else had taken root alongside it. Maybe it was the way Malik held those dog tags with such reverence, or how Jaden's eyes shone with innocent curiosity. Or maybe it was Erica's quiet gratitude. He managed a small, hesitant smile in return and walked toward the door. His steps were measured, his exit deliberate. The shame still burned, but beneath it flickered something new, a tiny spark of courage, a whisper of responsibility to these boys who looked at him not with judgment, but with trust. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a welcome change from the endless rain. Warren hesitated outside the Waffle House, his hand resting on the door handle. Through the window, he could see Malik and Jaden hunched over what looked like school books at the counter, while Erica sat nearby, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. Warren took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The familiar bell chimed, and Rosa looked up from behind the counter, giving him a gentle, knowing nod. The boys turned at the sound, and Jaden's face broke into a wide smile. "Mr. Soldier!" Jaden called out, waving enthusiastically. "Come see something!" Warren's feet felt heavy as he walked toward them, but he managed to keep his steps steady. He chose a seat one stool away from the boys, close enough to be polite but maintaining a safe distance. Jaden was already digging through his backpack, papers rustling and pencils clattering. Finally, he pulled out a slightly crumpled photograph, handling it with surprising care for an 8-year-old. "This is my daddy," Jaden announced proudly, smoothing the photo against the counter. "See? He's wearing his uniform just like yours." Warren's throat tightened as he looked at the photograph. Anthony's familiar smile beamed back at him, frozen in time. He was standing tall in his dress uniform, his arm around a younger Erica. Warren's hands trembled slightly, but he forced them still. "He looks very proud," Warren managed to say, his voice soft but steady. A few hours later, Warren found himself near the neighborhood basketball court, drawn by the rhythmic sound of a bouncing ball. Malik was there, practicing shots while Jaden sat on a nearby bench, alternating between homework and cheerleading duties. "You can do it, Malik!" Jaden shouted as another shot bounced off the rim. Warren watched from the shade of an old oak tree, memories washing over him. Anthony had loved basketball, always organizing impromptu games during their downtime. He'd been good at it too, quick and precise, just like everything else he did. Malik missed another shot, frustration clear in his slumped shoulders. Before Warren could stop himself, he stepped forward. "Try keeping your elbow in," he said quietly, "and follow through with your wrist." Malik startled slightly but didn't hesitate to adjust his stance. The ball arced through the air and swished through the net with a satisfying sound. Jaden jumped up, clapping and cheering, while Malik's face lit up with a bright, genuine smile. From a bench near the playground, Erica watched the scene unfold, her expression soft and thoughtful. As the afternoon wound down, they all walked together toward the neighborhood streets. Erica fell into step beside Warren, letting the boys run ahead. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping Malik with his shot. Basketball was—" She paused. "Anthony loved it." Warren shrugged uncomfortably, but his eyes stayed on the boys, softening as Jaden attempted to dribble and nearly tripped over his own feet. "Anthony always said laughter could heal anything," Erica continued, her voice warm with memory. "He had the best sense of humor, could make anyone smile, even on the worst days." Warren shifted, caught between discomfort and a strange pull to know more. He nodded once, then turned away, heading back toward his apartment. But as he walked, he couldn't ignore the small warmth in his chest. The first real feeling of peace he'd experienced in years, born from a simple afternoon of helping a boy make a basket. The next morning brought scattered clouds and a gentle breeze. Warren pushed open the Waffle House door, his stomach growling after skipping breakfast. He'd meant to have a quiet meal alone, but the sound of childish giggles immediately caught his attention. Jaden sat at the counter, his small legs swinging beneath him as he waved around several pieces of paper covered in colorful crayon drawings. Rosa leaned over the counter, her usual coffee pot temporarily forgotten as she listened to the boy's animated explanation. "And then, boom! Daddy saves everyone!" Jaden was saying, making explosive gestures with his hands. His eyes lit up when he spotted Warren. "Mr. Soldier, come see my comic!" Warren's first instinct was to retreat, but something in Jaden's eager expression made his feet move forward instead. He settled onto a nearby stool, and Jaden immediately scooted closer, spreading out his artwork. "It's called Soldier Daddy," Jaden announced proudly. "Want me to read it to you?" Before Warren could respond, Jaden launched into his story, complete with sound effects. "Swoosh, that's the helicopter," he explained, pointing to a wobbly circle with blades. "And here's Daddy being super brave, pew pew. Those are the good guy bullets." Something about the child's innocent interpretation of war, combined with his enthusiastic sound effects, cracked Warren's carefully maintained facade. A small smirk tugged at his lips, and before he knew it, a quiet chuckle escaped. The sound surprised even him. When was the last time he'd laughed? Rosa's eyebrows shot up and she quickly busied herself with the coffee maker, hiding her own smile. Later, outside in the parking lot, Malik approached Warren with newfound confidence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt as they stood there. "Did you play sports when you were a kid?" Malik asked, his hands fidgeting with a worn basketball. Warren shifted his weight, uncomfortable with personal questions but not wanting to dismiss the boy entirely. "Some," he admitted. "Basketball mostly, with friends." Malik's eyes lit up. "Want to play? Just for a minute?" Warren glanced around, spotting Erica approaching with grocery bags. She paused at the edge of the parking lot, watching them with interest. His instinct was to decline, to maintain his distance, but Malik was already dribbling the ball. "Just one game?" Malik pressed, passing the ball to Warren. Warren caught it reflexively, the familiar texture bringing back memories of easier times. He dribbled once, twice, then nodded. "Okay, quick game." They played in the empty parking lot, careful to avoid the few parked cars. The ball bounced against the asphalt, creating a steady rhythm that matched Warren's heartbeat. Erica watched from her spot, grocery bags at her feet, a warm smile spreading across her face. As evening approached, they all walked toward Erica's house. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Their neighbor, Marcus Boyd, was watering his front lawn when they passed. "Well, look at these happy fellows," Marcus called out, noting the boys' animated chatter. Erica smiled, adjusting her grocery bags. "Uncle Ben's been keeping them entertained," she said casually. Warren felt his cheeks warm at the unexpected nickname. He opened his mouth to protest but stopped, letting the words hang in the air unchallenged. Later that night in his quiet apartment, Warren sat on his worn couch. The day's events played through his mind as he held Anthony's photograph. His finger traced the familiar features of his friend's face, and he remembered the sound of his own laughter from earlier. It felt like a betrayal and a healing all at once. Being happy in a world without Anthony, yet finding joy with Anthony's children. The contradiction sat heavy in his chest as he stared at the photograph, feeling simultaneously closer to and further from his friend's memory than ever before. The early morning sun filtered through the Waffle House windows, casting a warm glow across the worn leather booths. Erica sat with her boys, the newspaper spread out between them as they discussed the comic section. Jaden pointed excitedly at his favorite characters while Malik rolled his eyes good-naturedly at his brother's enthusiasm. When Warren walked in, the bell above the door chiming softly, he kept his eyes fixed on the counter. His plan was simple: grab coffee, maybe nod hello, and retreat to his usual solitude. But Malik's voice carried across the diner. "Mr. Carter, did you know what kind of music my dad liked?" Warren's hand froze on the door handle. He turned slowly, surprised by how naturally the memory surfaced. He liked country music," Warren said, his voice quiet but steady. "Used to hum this one song all the time during night watch." The boys' eyes widened with interest. Jaden scooted over, making room in their booth. "What song?" he asked eagerly. Warren found himself sliding into the seat, his coffee forgotten at the counter. "It was this old ballad about coming home," he said, the melody playing in his mind. "Your dad would sing it under his breath, especially on clear nights when we could see the stars." "Dad liked country music?" Malik wrinkled his nose, making Erica laugh softly. "He sure did," Warren continued, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Said it reminded him of home, of you all." Later that afternoon, sunshine warmed the park as Warren walked alongside the duck pond with Malik and Jaden. The water rippled with tiny waves as Jaden tossed breadcrumbs, giggling when the ducks quacked and scrambled for the treats. "Was Dad really brave?" Malik asked suddenly, his voice quiet but intense. Warren's throat tightened. He watched a duck paddle closer to shore, buying time to compose his thoughts. "Your dad was one of the kindest men I knew," he said carefully. "Always had a joke ready when things got tough. Made everyone smile, even on the worst days." "But was he brave?" Malik persisted. Warren nodded, keeping his eyes on the pond. "Very brave. He cared about people more than anything." The words felt hollow, inadequate to describe Anthony's sacrifice, but he couldn't bring himself to say more. Jaden scattered his last handful of crumbs. "Did he tell jokes on missions too?" "All the time." Warren managed a small smile, grateful for the lighter topic. "Once, during a really long night patrol, he told this terrible knock-knock joke about a chicken." As dusk approached, they reached Erica's front porch. The boys raced inside, their sneakers thumping on the wooden steps, leaving Warren and Erica standing in the growing shadows. "Is it hard?" Erica asked softly. "Talking about Anthony?" Warren stared at his boots, his shoulders tensing. The truth pressed against his chest, demanding to be spoken. "I owe him everything," he whispered hoarsely, "and I failed him." The words hung in the evening air. Erica's brow furrowed at the confession, but she didn't push for more. Instead, she said gently, "We're glad you're here, Warren." He turned away, unable to meet her eyes, his shoulders heavy with the burden of unspoken truths. But something shifted in that moment, a tiny seed of trust taking root between them, fragile but real. The morning sun streamed through the Waffle House windows, casting long shadows across the worn tabletop where Warren sat with his usual black coffee. Rosa bustled behind the counter, humming softly as she worked. The familiar bell chimed as Malik and Jaden burst through the door, their excitement filling the quiet diner. "Look what we found, Mr. Carter," Jaden called out, practically bouncing toward Warren's booth. Malik followed more slowly, his hand clutching something that glinted in the sunlight. Warren's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips as he recognized the metal chain dangling from Malik's fingers. Dog tags. Anthony's dog tags. "Mom let us bring them today," Malik explained, his voice proud as he slipped the chain over his head. The tags clinked softly against his chest. "They make me feel brave, like Dad was." Warren set his cup down carefully, trying to hide how badly his hands were shaking. Those tags. He remembered the sound they made, the way they caught the desert sun the last time he'd seen them on Anthony. That's nice," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Later at the basketball court, the afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement. Warren tried to focus on teaching Malik a new crossover dribble, but his eyes kept drifting to the tags that swung with each of the boys' movements. "Keep your hand low when you switch," Warren instructed, demonstrating the move. "That's it, just like that." Malik copied the motion, his face scrunched in concentration. The tags caught the light, making Warren's chest tighten. "I did it!" Malik exclaimed as he successfully completed the move. "Way to go!" Jaden cheered from the sideline, clapping enthusiastically. Warren forced himself to smile, to stay present, to be there for these boys who somehow trusted him. But every flash of metal, every soft clink of those tags, sent him back to that terrible day. That evening, Warren sat alone in his dimly lit apartment. The street lamp outside cast shadows across the coffee table where Anthony's unopened letter lay. He'd retrieved it from its hiding place in an old shoebox, but now he just stared at it, unable to move. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the envelope. Anthony's handwriting was neat and precise on the front. "For Warren, if anything happens to me." Warren knew there were words inside that letter. Maybe words of forgiveness, maybe final requests, maybe accusations. He couldn't bear to find out which. The weight of those possibilities pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. With shaking hands, he pulled open his desk drawer and carefully placed the letter inside. The drawer closed with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Warren sat back, exhausted from the simple act of moving the letter from one hiding place to another. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Not while the sight of Anthony's dog tags around his son's neck still made him feel like he was drowning in guilt. Not while he still couldn't forgive himself for surviving when Anthony didn't. The morning light filtered through the Waffle House windows as Warren nursed his coffee, savoring the peaceful moments before the usual breakfast rush. The bell chimed, and he looked up to see Erica leading Malik and Jaden inside, their faces bright with morning energy. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Jaden called out, sliding into the booth next to him. The familiar warmth of their presence had become a comfort Warren hadn't expected. Rosa brought over chocolate milk for the boys and coffee for Erica. The conversation flowed easily until Malik, playing with his pancakes, said something that made Warren's world stop. "Mama told us Daddy saved a soldier's life before he died," Malik mentioned casually, pride evident in his voice. Before Warren could process this, Jaden added innocently, "That soldier was supposed to keep us safe, but he never came back." Warren's hand froze mid-reach for his coffee cup. His throat went dry, and his heart hammered against his ribs. He forced his face into what he hoped was a casual smile. "Hey, have you guys tried the new Waffle special?" he asked, his voice slightly higher than normal. "Rosa makes them with extra chocolate chips now." Erica's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the sudden shift in his demeanor. Outside in the parking lot, Warren leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths of the morning air. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Marcus Boyd, walking past with his morning paper, paused at the sight of Warren's pale face. "Everything okay there?" Marcus asked kindly. "Just the past," Warren muttered, staring at the ground. "It's complicated." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You know, sometimes speaking the truth can heal old wounds." Warren said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. Later at the park, Malik and Jaden bounced around Warren with their usual energy, but their questions had taken on a new focus. "Tell us about when you and Dad were soldiers together," Malik pressed. "Was he really brave?" Jaden added eagerly. Warren pointed at a group of ducks waddling nearby. "Hey, look at that big one. Betty thinks he's the boss of the pond." He pulled a silly face, crossing his eyes, but the boys weren't so easily distracted anymore. They exchanged glances, sensing the shift in their usually friendly companion. Warren grew quieter with each question, his responses becoming shorter, more distant. From her bench nearby, Erica watched the interaction, worry creasing her forehead. The easy connection Warren had built with her sons seemed to be crumbling under the weight of whatever he was holding back. Warren stood awkwardly now, hands in his pockets, no longer meeting the boys' eager gazes. The truth he'd been running from was closing in, threatening to destroy the small piece of peace he'd found with Anthony's family. Warren paced his small apartment as the early morning sun cast long shadows across the worn carpet. His hands trembled as he moved back and forth, the weight of his secrets pressing down on him like a physical force. The truth was a tangled mess in his mind. Anthony's sons, so innocent and trusting, didn't know their father had died saving him. They didn't know that he, Warren Carter, had frozen in terror when it mattered most. "I can't do this," he whispered to the empty room. "I can't face them anymore." His breathing came in short, sharp bursts as memories flooded back. Anthony's voice calling his name, the crack of gunfire, the moment of paralysis that had cost his best friend everything. The boy's recent questions echoed in his head, making his stomach churn. At the Waffle House later that day, Warren hunched behind a newspaper in the farthest corner booth, trying to make himself invisible. The familiar bell above the door chimed, and his heart sank as Erica's voice filled the diner, followed by the boys' cheerful chatter. "Mr. Carter!" Jaden's excited voice carried across the restaurant. Warren's hands clenched the newspaper tighter, his knuckles turning white. He managed a weak nod without meeting their eyes, then quickly buried his face behind the pages again. The words blurred before him as he struggled to breathe normally. Rosa moved between tables, coffee pot in hand. She paused near Warren, her concerned frown deepening as she watched him shrink further into his corner. "You okay, hun?" she asked softly. Warren couldn't even answer. His throat felt too tight. The afternoon stretched long and gray as clouds gathered overhead. Warren stood in the bus shelter near the basketball court, watching raindrops begin to fall. The court where he'd helped Malik with his shots lay empty and wet, the basketball hoop swaying slightly in the wind. He knew the boys would be waiting for him. They'd probably brought their ball, expecting another afternoon of games and laughter. The thought of their disappointed faces made his chest ache. Erica's words from days ago floated back to him. "He saved you for a reason. Don't waste it." The rain tapped a steady rhythm on the shelter's metal roof as Warren hugged himself against the growing chill. He was back at square one, hiding from the world, from connection, from the truth. The Williams family had started to feel like home, something he hadn't felt since before the war. Now he was throwing it all away because he couldn't face his own guilt. Through the rain-streaked glass of the shelter, he could see two small figures in the distance, checking the court before turning away. His heart clenched, knowing it was Malik and Jaden, probably wondering why their new friend had disappeared. Warren slumped against the bus shelter wall, closing his eyes against the sight. He was doing what he did best, running away. But this time felt different. This time, he wasn't just running from his past. He was running from a future that might have brought him peace. The rain continued to fall as Warren remained frozen in place, trapped between his shame and the possibility of redemption, watching as the chance for connection slipped away once again. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Waffle House as Rosa Parker wiped down the counter, her movements slower than usual. Her eyes kept drifting to Warren's empty booth, which had gathered dust over the past few days. The familiar sight of his slumped shoulders and untouched coffee was notably absent. Erica sat with her boys at their usual table, but the atmosphere felt heavy. Malik pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate while Jaden's usual chatter was replaced with worried glances at the door. "Still no sign of Mr. Carter?" Rosa asked softly as she approached their table with fresh orange juice. Malik and Jaden exchanged looks before Jaden whispered to his brother, "Maybe he's sick? Or maybe he doesn't like us anymore," Malik replied, his voice barely audible. Erica reached across the table, squeezing both boys' hands. "That's not true. Sometimes grown-ups just need space to figure things out." But her eyes betrayed her worry as she stared at Warren's empty booth. Later that day, Erica found herself standing outside Warren's apartment door. The hallway was quiet, except for the hum of a distant air conditioner. She raised her hand and knocked gently. Inside, Warren sat on his couch, Anthony's unopened letter trembling in his hands. At the sound of knocking, he froze. Then came Erica's voice, soft but clear through the door. "Warren, are you there?" He pressed his back against the door, sliding down until he sat on the floor. His breathing grew shallow as he listened to her gentle attempts to reach him. "The boys miss you," she continued. "We all do." Warren closed his eyes tight, his jaw clenching. He remained silent, perfectly still, as if any movement might betray his presence. After what felt like an eternity, he heard her sigh. "We miss you," she said one last time before her footsteps faded away down the hall. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Warren stood in the shadows beside the closed hardware store, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Marcus Boyd noticed him while walking home. The older man approached carefully, his face etched with concern. "Everything all right, son?" Marcus asked, stopping a few feet away. Warren kept his eyes on the ground. "I'm only making things worse," he muttered. "Being around them, it's not right. Not after what happened." Marcus studied him for a moment before speaking. "Running doesn't heal wounds, Warren. Facing them does." Warren shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him as he stood there, caught between the urge to flee and the desperate need to make things right. The morning light filtered through the Waffle House windows as Erica sat with her boys, their breakfast growing cold. Rosa moved between tables with fresh coffee, pausing at their booth more often than necessary. "Extra whipped cream?" Rosa offered, gesturing at Jaden's barely touched waffle. "On the house, sweetie." Jaden shook his head, his usual spark missing. "No, thank you," he mumbled, pushing his plate away. Malik's fingers wrapped around Anthony's dog tags, rubbing the raised letters like a worry stone. His eyes kept drifting to the empty booth in the corner where Warren used to sit. "Maybe we could wait just a little longer?" Malik suggested quietly. Erica's heart ached as she watched her son's disappointment. She knew they were hurting more than they let on. Later that afternoon, sunshine warmed the community garden as Erica and the boys picked fresh herbs. Warren stood hidden behind thick bushes, watching them move between the neat rows of plants. The boys' shoulders slumped as they half-heartedly helped their mother gather basil and thyme. "Mama?" Jaden's voice carried across the garden. "Maybe Mr. Warren never liked us after all." Warren's chest tightened at the words. He gripped a nearby branch, tears threatening to spill. Erica stopped picking herbs and pulled Jaden close. "That's not true, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have big feelings they need to work through." "But why won't he talk to us?" Jaden pressed. "I miss him," Malik added softly. Warren blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision as tears rolled down his cheeks. That evening, Warren sat alone in his apartment holding the old unit photo. His thumb traced over Anthony's smiling face. He remembered the day Anthony had proudly shown him pictures of Erica and the boys, how his whole face would light up talking about his family. "Look at my boys," Anthony had said, beaming. "Aren't they something?" Warren's fists clenched as the memory washed over him. He stared at the photo, at Anthony's confident smile, at the way he'd always stood tall and proud. The shame that had paralyzed Warren for so long now felt different, like a weight that dishonored his friend's memory. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, determination slowly replacing the familiar ache of guilt. Something had to change, but the path forward remained unclear. The early morning sun streamed through the Waffle House windows as Warren stood at the entrance, his hand trembling on the door handle. Inside, he spotted Erica and the boys at their usual booth. His heart thundered against his ribs as he pushed the door open. Jaden's face lit up instantly, then dimmed just as quickly, like a candle flickering in the wind. The boys' uncertainty was clear. Would Warren disappear again? Warren forced his feet forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. Rosa, wiping down the counter, gave him an encouraging nod. "May I?" Warren gestured to their booth, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Erica replied softly. He slid into the seat, shoulders rigid with tension. How are you all doing?" His eyes met Erica's, trying to convey the regret that sat heavy in his chest. Later, as they walked around the block, the sounds of children's laughter drifted over from a nearby playground. Jaden held tight to Erica's hand, watching other kids chase each other across monkey bars. "Mr. Warren?" Jaden's voice was small, hesitant. "Do you remember any more funny stories about Daddy?" Warren swallowed hard, then managed a slight smile. "Well, there was this one time in the barracks. Your dad had this joke about a penguin and a taco." He shared the memory, watching the boys' faces brighten at the thought of their father making others laugh. Erica observed Warren carefully as he spoke, noting how he seemed to want to say more but couldn't quite get the words out. By mid-afternoon, they stood at Erica's doorstep. Malik fingered the dog tags around his neck, gathering courage. "Was my dad ever scared?" he asked suddenly. Warren looked at the boy, his expression softening. "Everyone gets scared, Malik, even the bravest soldiers." He paused, almost mentioning that final mission, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "I'll come by tomorrow if that's okay." Erica's eyes met his, warm and encouraging, silently accepting his small step forward. The morning sun warmed the Little League basketball court as parents and kids gathered for the practice match. Erica sat on the aluminum bleachers with Jaden bouncing beside her, both watching Malik warm up with his teammates. Neither expected to see Warren walking toward them, clutching a small paper bag of fresh oranges. "For the team," he said quietly, holding out the bag. Malik spotted him from the court and waved excitedly. During the game, Warren stood at the edge of the bleachers, his hands stuffed in his pockets. When Malik got the ball, Warren's voice lifted above the crowd. "You've got this, Malik!" The boy dribbled, took aim, and scored. The swoosh of the net brought a genuine smile to Warren's face as he clapped. Erica watched him, her eyes bright with gratitude. After the game, as kids and parents milled around the bleachers, Jaden tugged at Warren's sleeve. "Mr. Warren, I need help with my school project," Jaden said, scuffing his sneaker against the concrete. "It's about heroes, someone we look up to." Warren's throat tightened. "Oh?" "I was thinking maybe about Daddy." Jaden paused, glancing up at Warren. "Or maybe—" Warren's stomach twisted as he realized Jaden was considering him as a subject. He quickly cleared his throat. "Your dad was really special, Jaden. I could tell you some stories about how kind he was to everyone." Warren's voice wavered. How he always shared his care packages, made sure new soldiers felt welcome. Later that afternoon, Warren pushed his shopping cart out of the grocery store, carefully balancing a boxed basketball hoop on top. As he loaded it into his truck, Marcus Boyd appeared beside him. "That's a nice gesture," Marcus said, nodding at the hoop. "Replacing that old one by Erica's house?" Warren shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "The current one's pretty rusty." Marcus patted Warren's shoulder. "I see that spark coming back, son. Takes courage to care again." Warren gripped the truck door, his knuckles white. The weight of his unspoken truth pressed against his chest, threatening to crush the fragile trust he was building. He needed to tell them everything, but the thought of losing their warmth, their acceptance, made his hands shake. The morning light filtered through the Waffle House windows as Warren stirred his coffee absently. Across the booth, Malik and Jaden studied their menus with exaggerated concentration, debating between chocolate chip and blueberry waffles. Erica sat beside them, her hands wrapped around her own coffee mug. "Warren," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "why don't you ever talk about that last mission? About what happened to Anthony? Warren's hand trembled slightly as he set down his spoon. He stared into the dark liquid, watching his distorted reflection ripple. He deserved better, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Erica's eyes held a gentle plea for more, but she didn't push further. Later that afternoon, sunlight streamed through the living room windows as they gathered around the coffee table. Photo albums lay open, showing glimpses of Anthony's life. Jaden excitedly pointed to a particular photograph. "Look, this is my favorite picture of Daddy," he exclaimed, tapping a photo of Anthony in his uniform, his smile bright and confident. "Mine too," Warren said quietly, remembering the day that photo was taken. Malik rustled through some papers and pulled out a crayon drawing. "I made this for school," he said proudly, holding up the picture. It showed Anthony as a superhero, complete with a cape and a bright S on his chest. Warren's throat constricted. The image of Anthony as a hero hit too close to home, the real hero who had sacrificed everything to save him. His hands trembled as he set down the photo he'd been holding. The boys noticed his sudden silence, exchanging worried glances. As dusk settled, Warren stepped out onto the porch. Erica followed, closing the door softly behind them. The porch light cast a warm glow around them as crickets chirped in the distance. "Anthony believed in you," Erica said softly, her voice carrying in the evening quiet. "He loved you like a brother. He wouldn't want this silence." Warren stared at his feet, tears welling in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, refusing to break free. Erica reached out and squeezed his hand gently before turning and going back inside. Warren remained on the porch, alone under the yellow light, his body shaking with the burden of his unspoken secret. Warren jolted awake in his dimly lit apartment, sweat beading on his forehead. Anthony's voice from the dream still echoed in his mind. "Speak up. Tell them." His heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to steady his breathing. The nightmare had felt so real. Anthony's outstretched hand, his pleading eyes. Stumbling to the kitchen table, Warren's trembling fingers found the worn envelope. Anthony's letter. He traced the edge with his thumb, feeling the weight of unread words inside. Maybe today would be the day he finally gathered enough courage to read it. At noon, sunlight streamed through the Waffle House windows as Warren slid into the familiar booth across from Erica and the boys. Malik was explaining their planned visit to the Veteran Memorial Wall at the park. "And guess what?" Jaden piped up, bouncing slightly in his seat. "Our school's having a special Veterans Day thing soon. Will you come, Uncle Ben?" Warren's muscles tensed at the invitation. His coffee cup clinked against its saucer as he set it down carefully. This could be the moment, the chance to finally speak his truth, to honor Anthony's memory properly. He swallowed hard. "I'll be there," he managed, his voice unsteady but determined. Later that afternoon, the park was peaceful. While Erica went to get ice cream, the boys led Warren to the memorial wall. Sunlight glinted off the polished surface as Malik ran his finger along the engraved names. "Look," Malik said softly, pointing to one particular inscription. "Here's Dad's name." Warren stared at Anthony's name, each letter carved deep into the stone. His chest tightened. "Uncle Ben?" Jaden's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Were you there when Daddy?" The question hung in the air, incomplete but clear. Warren's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," he whispered, the single word catching in his throat. He couldn't say more, not yet, but that simple admission felt like the first crack in a dam. The boys stood quietly, sensing the weight of that single word. When Erica returned, balancing 4 ice cream cones, she found Warren looking at her with red-rimmed eyes, but newfound resolve. "I'll tell you the whole truth soon," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Erica nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. She understood. Warren was finally ready to face what he'd been running from all this time. Rosa watched from behind the counter as Warren entered the Waffle House that morning, his shoulders tense but his stride purposeful. Erica and the boys were already settled in their usual booth, Jaden's legs swinging beneath the table as he colored on a paper placemat. Near the entrance, a bright flyer caught Warren's eye. Veterans Day School Assembly, it announced in bold letters. Guest speakers welcome. His stomach churned as he approached the booth. Did you see? Malik pointed excitedly to the flyer. Our school's doing this big thing for Veterans Day. There'll be music and everything. And we get to talk about heroes, Jaden added, beaming. Like Daddy. Warren's coffee cup rattled slightly as he set it down. Erica noticed his trembling hands and gently placed her warm palm on his forearm. The simple gesture steadied him, though his heart still raced. Later that afternoon, Warren stood near the memorial wall, watching children chase each other across the nearby playground. Their laughter carried on the breeze, reminding him of simpler times. Beautiful day, Marcus Boyd said, approaching with careful steps. He nodded toward the playing children. They remind us why it all matters, don't they? Warren managed a weak smile but remained silent. You know, Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm, those kids at the school, they need to hear real stories, not just about glory, but about loss, about courage in all its forms. Warren's jaw tightened. I don't know if I can... Just think about it, Marcus said, patting Warren's shoulder before walking away. As evening settled, Warren and Erica stood on her front porch. Through the window, they could see Malik and Jaden sprawled on the living room floor, absorbed in their books. The boys would really appreciate hearing from you at the assembly, Erica said softly. Warren stared at his feet. I'm scared, Erica, once I start talking. I know, she interrupted gently. The truth is heavy, but maybe that weight isn't meant to be carried alone. She touched his arm again, that same reassuring gesture from the morning. Sometimes healing starts with speaking the words we're most afraid to say. No. Warren looked at the boys through the window, then back at Erica. I'll think about it tonight, he promised, his voice barely above a whisper. Warren sat at his small kitchen table the next morning, staring at Anthony's letter. Sunlight streamed through the dusty window, illuminating the worn envelope's creases. His fingers traced the familiar handwriting, Anthony's last words to him, still unread after all this time. The paper felt heavy in his hands, weighted with unspoken truths. His thumb slid under the sealed flap, and for a moment he almost tore it open. But something stopped him. His breath caught in his throat as he set the letter back down with trembling hands. Not yet, he whispered to the empty room. I need to tell them first, face to face. He placed the letter carefully back on the table, smoothing it with his palm. A strange calm settled over him. Not peace exactly, but resolution. The truth needed to come from his lips before he could read Anthony's final message. Later that afternoon, the familiar bell above the Waffle House door chimed as Warren entered. The smell of coffee and maple syrup wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Erica sat with the boys in their usual booth, Malik helping Jaden with what looked like math homework. Warren slid into the seat across from them, his heart hammering but his voice steady. Hey guys, I've been thinking about something. Both boys looked up, Jaden's pencil pausing mid-equation. How would you feel if... Warren paused, gathering courage. If I spoke about your dad at the Veterans Day event? The change in their expressions was immediate. Malik's eyes widened with joy, his hand automatically reaching for Anthony's dog tags around his neck. The metal clinked softly as he gripped them. Really? Jaden bounced in his seat, homework forgotten. You'd tell everyone about Daddy? That would be awesome, Malik added, his usual reserve melting into excitement. Would you tell them about how brave he was? Warren met Erica's gaze across the table. Her eyes shimmered with grateful tears, and she gave him an encouraging smile that warmed something deep in his chest. As the evening approached, Warren stepped out into the cooling air. Behind him, Rosa Parker hurried through the door, still wearing her apron. Warren, wait, she called softly. He turned, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. Rosa had watched his struggle these past weeks, serving coffee and quiet understanding in equal measure. You've come a long way, Warren, she said, her weathered face kind. Don't be afraid of what's next. Her simple words touched something in him, and he nodded, unable to speak. The sky above was clearing after days of clouds. stars beginning to peek through. Warren walked home under that brightening sky, each step feeling more certain than the last. The truth about Anthony's death, about his own failure and Anthony's sacrifice, would be hard to tell. But for the first time, Warren felt ready to speak it, to honor his friend's memory with honesty instead of silence. Warren stood behind the heavy stage curtain, his heart thundering against his ribs. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with quiet conversation as parents, teachers, and students settled into their seats. Through a gap in the curtain, he could see Marcus Boyd helping late arrivals find chairs, while Rosa Parker arranged cookies and punch on a long table near the entrance. American flags decorated the walls alongside children's colorful drawings of soldiers and handwritten thank you notes to veterans. The sight made Warren's throat tighten. His fingers found the edge of his prepared speech in his pocket, though he knew he wouldn't need it. These words had lived in his heart far too long. In the front row, Erica sat between Malik and Jaden. Both boys wore pressed shirts and proud smiles, Malik's fingers absently touching his father's dog tags. Warren watched as Jaden whispered something to his mother, making her smile and squeeze his hand. The school principal approached the podium, her voice warm and welcoming as she introduced the Veterans Day ceremony. "Today," she said, "we honor those who served our country, those who returned, and those who made the ultimate sacrifice." Warren closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. Several veterans shared their stories, tales of brotherhood, courage, and service. Then, too quickly, he heard his name called. His legs felt like lead as he walked to the microphone. The audience fell silent, waiting. Warren gripped the podium's edges, looking out at the sea of faces. His gaze found Erica's encouraging smile, and somehow, he found his voice. "I want to tell you about Anthony Williams," he began softly. "He was my best friend, the finest soldier I ever knew, and most importantly, a devoted father to two amazing boys." Malik and Jaden sat up straighter, their faces glowing with pride. Warren continued, describing Anthony's infectious laugh, his unwavering loyalty, and his constant talk about his family. Then Warren's voice cracked. "But there's something else you need to know." His hands trembled on the podium. "During our last mission together, we were ambushed. When the shooting started, I froze." A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. Warren forced himself to keep going, though tears threatened. Anthony could have taken cover. He could have saved himself. Instead, he pushed me out of the way and took the bullet meant for me. Warren's voice shook with emotion. "I've carried that guilt every day since. I didn't feel worthy of his sacrifice. I couldn't face his family, knowing I was the reason those boys lost their father." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some parents covered their mouths in shock. Others wiped away tears. Erica sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Warren's face. But Anthony's final words weren't about blame. Warren continued. With his last breath, he grabbed my hand and said, "Tell my boys I loved them more than anything. Tell them to be brave." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Malik and Jaden stared at Warren, their young faces processing this revelation about their father's death. Understanding dawned in their eyes. Why Warren had seemed so haunted, why he'd struggled to be around them. Before Warren could say more, Erica rose from her seat. Her heels clicked softly on the stage steps as she walked to him. Taking his trembling hand in hers, she leaned close to the microphone and whispered words that carried clearly through the hushed room. "He saved you because he believed in you. We believe in you too." The audience remained silent, moved by the raw emotion of the moment. Some were crying openly now, others nodding in understanding and respect. Warren stood there, Erica's hand warm in his, finally free of the secret that had weighed him down for so long. Warren stood backstage in the empty auditorium, his legs unsteady as he paced back and forth. Tears streamed freely down his face now that he didn't have to maintain composure in front of the crowd. His confession had drained him completely, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. The truth he'd carried for so long hung heavy in the air around him. Footsteps approached, small, hesitant ones. He turned to see Malik and Jaden standing there, their young faces a mixture of confusion and hurt. Malik's fingers wrapped tightly around his father's dog tags, which he'd removed from his neck. He held them close to his chest like a shield, his knuckles white from gripping them so hard. Jaden's lower lip trembled as he looked up at Warren, tears welling in his eyes. The little boy who had been so eager to hear stories about his father now stood uncertain, caught between anger and sadness. His usual boundless energy was gone, replaced by a stillness that broke Warren's heart. Warren slowly lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to their eye level. He bowed his head, unable to meet their gaze, waiting for whatever reaction would come. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. In a nearby hallway, Erica gathered her sons close, her own eyes glistening with tears. She wrapped her arms around them both, drawing them into a tight embrace. The boys buried their faces in their mother's shoulders, seeking comfort in her familiar warmth. "Your daddy," Erica began softly, her voice steady despite her tears, "made a choice that day. He chose to save Warren because he loved him like family." She stroked Jaden's hair as he sniffled against her shoulder. "But he froze," Malik whispered, confusion evident in his voice. "How could Dad love someone who froze?" "War is complicated, sweetheart," Erica explained gently. "Even the bravest soldiers can get scared. What matters is that your father believed in Warren so much that he wanted him to live." The boys clung tighter to their mother, trying to process this new understanding of their father's death. They had seen Warren's pain as he spoke, heard the tremor in his voice, witnessed the weight of guilt that had crushed him for so long. Though they couldn't fully grasp the complexities of war and sacrifice, they recognized genuine suffering when they saw it. Erica reached out and placed a comforting hand on Warren's shoulder. He flinched slightly at the touch but didn't pull away. Her gesture spoke volumes: forgiveness, understanding, compassion. Later, as the crowd dispersed outside the school, Marcus Boyd and Rosa Parker found Warren before he could disappear into the gathering dusk. The parking lot had nearly emptied, leaving them in a quiet bubble of privacy. "Truth is the first step," Marcus said firmly, clasping Warren's shoulder. "The hardest step, but the first one toward healing." Rosa nodded, her kind eyes full of understanding. "Give them time, Warren. They'll understand." She squeezed his arm gently. "Children have bigger hearts than we sometimes give them credit for." Warren managed a weak nod before turning away. He walked home alone through the quiet streets, his footsteps heavy, but his secret finally lifted. The boys' confused faces still haunted him, their pain adding a fresh layer of guilt to his conscience. Yet somehow, beneath the ache, he felt something new, a strange lightness, as if chains had fallen away. The truth was out there now, no longer festering in darkness. That evening, the Williams' living room glowed softly with a single table lamp. Erica sat on their worn but comfortable couch, her arms wrapped protectively around Malik and Jaden. The boys leaned against her, their small bodies still processing the weight of everything they'd learned at the Veterans Day ceremony. "Mom," Malik whispered, fiddling with Anthony's dog tags in his hands. "Did Dad know he was going to—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Erica understood. "Your father was the bravest man I knew," she said softly, running her fingers through Malik's hair. "He protected people because that's who he was." Jaden shifted against her other side, his voice small but thoughtful. "Warren looked so sad when he told everyone what happened." "Remember when he taught me that basketball move?" Malik added suddenly, sitting up straighter. "And how he laughed at Jaden's silly comic?" Erica nodded, grateful for these memories surfacing through their confusion. "Yes, and remember how he fixed our porch swing? How he always listens to your stories?" "But he was scared when Daddy needed him," Jaden said, his brow furrowed with the effort of understanding such a complex situation. "Sometimes," Erica explained carefully, "being brave doesn't mean never being scared. It means facing our fears and telling the truth even when it's hard. Warren carried this heavy secret because he cared about how we would feel." "Like when I broke Mom's favorite mug and was scared to tell her?" Jaden asked. "Something like that, sweetheart," Erica smiled gently, "but much bigger. Warren needed time to be brave enough to tell us the truth. I miss when he helped me with basketball, Malik admitted quietly. Me too, Jaden echoed. He makes funny faces when he eats waffles. Erica hugged them closer. Understanding and forgiveness take time. We don't have to figure everything out tonight. Later that evening, as the boys got ready for bed upstairs, a soft knock sounded at the front door. Erica opened it to find Warren standing on the porch, his shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on his shoes as if expecting to be turned away. The porch light cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched there. Erica stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind her. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a worn envelope, its edges softened by years of careful handling. Warren's eyes widened as he recognized it. Another letter from Anthony, one he hadn't known existed. Anthony wrote this for you before his last deployment, Erica explained softly. He wanted you to have it, no matter what happened. Warren's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope. His fingers brushed against the paper reverently, as if touching something sacred. He wanted you to have this, Erica repeated gently, pressing the letter into his hands. Minutes later, Warren sat alone at his small kitchen table, the envelope before him under the harsh fluorescent light. The room felt too quiet, too still. He smoothed the worn paper with shaking fingers, noting how the corners had softened with age. Carefully, as if handling something that might crumble to dust, he opened the envelope. As he unfolded the letter within, tears blurred his vision, making the words swim before his eyes. His throat tightened with emotion. Anthony, he whispered into the silent room, his voice rough with unshed tears. I'm sorry I waited so long. He held the letter in his trembling hands, finally ready to read Anthony's last words to him. Warren's hands shook as he unfolded Anthony's letter under the harsh kitchen light. The familiar handwriting blurred through his tears as he began to read. To my brother in arms, Ben. If you're reading this, I didn't make it back. You're probably blaming yourself, but don't. We all make choices out there, and I made mine. You're alive for a reason, Ben. Don't let my boys grow up without knowing the kind of man you are. Be there for them like you've always been there for me. Warren's tears fell onto the paper, creating small dark spots on the edges. His chest heaved with silent sobs as he continued reading, Anthony's voice clear in his mind as if his friend were right there beside him. Tell Malik and Jaden their daddy was proud of them before he even met them. And don't forget to smile, Ben. You've got a good one. Use it. Warren pressed the letter to his chest, his body shaking with quiet sobs. All this time, the weight of guilt had nearly crushed him, yet Anthony had already forgiven him, had forgiven him before there was even anything to forgive. The realization washed over him like a warm rain, cleansing and profound. As the first rays of dawn crept through his apartment window, Warren sat at the table, physically exhausted but spiritually lighter. A small, tentative smile played at the corners of his mouth. The morning light caught the glass of the frame that held Anthony's photograph. Warren carefully folded the letter and slipped it into the frame alongside the photo. He placed them side by side on his shelf, two beacons to guide him forward, two reminders of the man he needed to become. Warren stood in his apartment's morning light, carefully folding Anthony's letter with reverent hands. He placed it beside the framed photograph of his fallen friend, the two items creating a small shrine of memory and promise on his shelf. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his jacket and grabbed his old toolkit from under the sink. The time for hiding was over. Anthony had asked him to be there for his boys, and Warren intended to honor that request. Outside Erica's home that afternoon, Warren approached the driveway where the basketball hoop hung slightly askew. Every shot made it rattle and shake, threatening to come loose completely. Instead of watching from afar as he had so many times before, he set his toolkit down and began working on the mounting brackets. The sound of tools drew Erica to her front door. She stood watching silently as Warren tightened bolts and adjusted the backboard. Without a word, she disappeared inside and returned moments later with a glass of cold lemonade. Warren accepted it with a slight nod and a tentative smile, the first real smile he'd shared with her since the truth came out. Through the living room window, Malik and Jaden observed Warren's work with curious eyes. They whispered to each other, pointing occasionally as Warren tested the hoop's stability with careful tugs. When the repairs were complete, Warren stepped back and called softly to Malik. "Want to try it out?" Malik emerged from the house, basketball in hand. He dribbled twice, took aim, and shot. The ball swooshed through the net with barely a rattle from the newly secured hoop. Jaden burst into applause from the doorway. Erica leaned against the porch railing, a gentle smile playing across her face as she watched the scene unfold. Marcus Boyd pedaled past on his bicycle, catching Warren's eye and offering an encouraging thumbs up. The boys approached Warren slowly, their movements still cautious but lacking the fear of previous days. Warren knelt down to their level, his voice soft but steady as he said, "I'm trying to be here for you, just like your dad wanted." Both boys nodded, and though uncertainty lingered in their eyes, they didn't back away. It was a small moment, but it felt like the beginning of something important. The next morning, Warren found himself sliding into the familiar booth at the Waffle House, though the atmosphere felt different now. Malik and Jaden sat quietly across from him, their usual chatter replaced by thoughtful silence. The weight of his Veterans Day confession hung between them like a heavy curtain. Warren cleared his throat, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Being scared doesn't make someone bad," he said softly. "It makes them human." The words came out shakier than he intended, but he pressed on. "Even the bravest soldiers feel fear sometimes." The boys listened without looking up, pushing their breakfast around their plates. Malik's hand unconsciously reached for the dog tags hanging around his neck, while Jaden's lower lip trembled slightly. Erica watched from beside them, her eyes full of hope that her sons would understand the complex nature of forgiveness. Later that afternoon, Warren found Jaden alone by the duck pond, tossing bits of bread without his usual enthusiasm. The boy's shoulders were slumped, his movements mechanical. Warren approached carefully, settling onto the bench beside him. "Why didn't you save my daddy?" Jaden's question came suddenly, piercing the air between them. His voice was small but direct, filled with the raw honesty of childhood grief. Warren's heart shattered at the words. He swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I was afraid," he admitted, his words barely above a whisper. "I panicked. Not because I didn't care about your dad, but because I was scared." He paused, watching a duck paddle closer. "I wish more than anything I could change what happened, but I can't." Tears welled up in Jaden's eyes, spilling onto his cheeks. Warren pulled a tissue from his pocket, offering it with trembling hands. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. That evening, they gathered in Erica's living room. The soft lamplight cast warm shadows as Erica read from a storybook, her voice gentle and soothing. Warren sat in the corner chair, touched that they'd invited him to stay for this intimate family moment. After the story ended, Jaden stood up slowly. He approached Warren, his small face serious but softer than before. "I'm sad," he said quietly, "but I know you're trying." From his spot on the couch, Malik nodded, his fingers wrapped tightly around their father's dog tags. Though full forgiveness wasn't there yet, the boys had cracked open a door that had seemed firmly shut just days before. Erica reached out, placing her hand on Warren's arm. The touch was light but steady, acknowledging the small but significant progress they'd made together. The next morning dawned clear and bright as Warren stood in Erica's driveway, watching Malik dribble the basketball. The hollow thump of the ball against concrete echoed through the quiet neighborhood as Warren stepped forward, gently adjusting Malik's stance. "Your dad used to do this funny thing before games," Warren said softly, then broke into an exaggerated shimmy that perfectly mimicked Anthony's pregame ritual. Malik's surprised laugh bubbled up, genuine and warm. It was the first real laugh since the Veterans Day confession, and it brightened the morning like sunshine breaking through clouds. From her spot on the porch, Erica watched them, wiping away tears of relief. Jaden sat on the bottom step, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched his brother and Warren interact. Later that afternoon, the bell above the Waffle House door chimed as they entered together. Rosa Parker's face lit up behind the counter, nodding approvingly as she saw them choose a single booth instead of separate tables. The vinyl seats squeaked as they settled in, shoulders touching comfortably as they shared a large plate of waffles. "Yep. Remember when Mama told us about Dad trying to make pancakes?" Jaden piped up, his voice lighter than it had been in days. Malik grinned, picking up the story. "He got batter everywhere, even in his hair." Warren's laugh joined theirs, deep and genuine. It felt natural now, not forced or hesitant. He wasn't just being tolerated, he was being included in their precious memories of Anthony. As evening settled over the neighborhood, they walked together down the quiet street. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting long shadows ahead of them. Marcus Boyd appeared around the corner, his face breaking into a warm smile at the sight of them all together. "Now that's what I like to see," Marcus called out, waving as he passed. Warren turned to Erica, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Erica's reply came without hesitation. "You found the courage Anthony always saw in you." They continued their walk home through the twilight, their footsteps falling naturally in sync, their hearts lighter than they'd been in a long time. The morning light filtered through Erica's living room windows, as Warren helped the boys open a weathered cardboard box filled with Anthony's keepsakes. The familiar scent of old paper and leather wafted up as they carefully lifted out photographs, letters, and military patches. Malik held up a faded baseball cap, running his fingers along the brim. "Dad wore this?" "All the time," Warren said softly, picking up a photograph. "Look here, this was taken during our first week of training. Your dad had just told this ridiculous joke about a penguin walking into a restaurant." Jaden scooted closer, peering at the image. What was the joke? Warren shared the silly punchline, and the boys giggled. He pointed out more faces in the photos, each memory carefully chosen to showcase Anthony's warmth and humor, rather than the weight of war. Erica sat cross-legged beside them, watching as Warren helped piece together their father's story. At the community playground that afternoon, the swings creaked gently in the breeze as Jaden kicked his feet in the wood chips. "I decided what I'm doing for my school project," he announced suddenly. "Oh yeah?" Warren looked up from where he sat on a nearby bench. "It's about heroes," Jaden said. "I want to write about Dad. And you." Warren's breath caught in his throat. "Me? Why would you?" "Because heroes don't have to be perfect," Jaden explained simply. "They just have to try and do what's right." Warren blinked rapidly, nodding as he struggled to find words. The simple wisdom in Jaden's statement touched something deep in his heart. Later at the Waffle House, Rosa set down 4 towering chocolate milkshakes, beaming as Jaden told her about his project. Malik, the dog tags gleaming against his t-shirt, turned to Warren. "Will you come?" he asked quietly. "When Jaden presents it?" "I wouldn't miss it," Warren replied without hesitation. Erica watched them from across the table, her eyes soft with emotion. The pain wasn't gone. It might never completely fade, but something new had grown in its place. Understanding, forgiveness, love. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Erica's front porch as Warren knelt by the door, toolbox open beside him. The metallic sounds of his work on the creaky hinge filled the quiet morning air. Malik approached softly, clutching a piece of paper in his hands. "I made this," he said, holding out his drawing. Warren set down his screwdriver and carefully took the paper. His breath caught as he studied the careful crayon strokes. There was Anthony, surrounded by a golden glow, watching over them all. And there was Warren himself, standing beside Malik and Jaden, his hands resting protectively on their shoulders. The simple artwork spoke volumes about how far they'd come. "Thank you, Malik," Warren whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Later that morning, Warren and Erica sat in lawn chairs watching the boys toss a baseball back and forth in the small backyard. The rhythmic sounds of the ball hitting their gloves created a peaceful backdrop. "Thank you," Erica said quietly, "for telling us the truth about that day. It hurt to hear it, but the not knowing was worse." She paused, watching Jaden make a catch. "You know, I can still hear Anthony's laugh sometimes. He had such joy in him." Her eyes met Warren's. "He'd be proud of you, Warren, of how far you've come." "I hope so," Warren replied with a sad smile. Erica reached over and placed her hand gently on top of his. They sat in comfortable silence, united in their shared memories of Anthony and their love for his children. That evening, as bedtime approached, Jaden bounced excitedly in the living room, holding up his completed project board. "Look," he exclaimed, pointing to the carefully arranged photos, Anthony in his uniform on one side, Warren in his army jacket on the other. Between them, Jaden had written in his best handwriting about courage, mistakes, and love. "Will you really come see me present it?" Jaden asked, eyes hopeful. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Warren promised. The boys moved in for a hug and Erica joined them. They stood there together, arms wrapped around each other, their embrace speaking of healing and hope. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was real and true and full of love. The morning sun streamed through the Waffle House windows, casting a warm glow across their familiar booth. Rosa Parker approached with a loaded tray, setting down plates of golden waffles, steaming coffee for the adults, and orange juice for the boys. "Look," Jaden said, pointing at the window. "No rain today." Malik grinned and nudged Warren with his elbow. "Yeah, Uncle Ben finally scared all the clouds away." The nickname, once hesitant, now rolled easily off Malik's tongue. Everyone at the table chuckled warmly, the sound genuine and free. Back at the family home, Warren knelt before Malik, who had been wearing Anthony's dog tags faithfully since finding them. With gentle hands, Warren lifted the chain from around Malik's neck. The metal caught the sunlight as Warren slipped the tags over his own head, letting them rest against his chest. Malik's face lit up. "You're brave now, too." "Yeah," Jaden chimed in proudly, bouncing on his toes. Erica watched from nearby, her eyes glistening with joyful tears. The sight of Warren wearing Anthony's tags, not out of guilt now but acceptance, made her heart swell. Warren touched the tags reverently, feeling Anthony's presence wrap around him like a warm embrace. Later that afternoon, they walked together down their peaceful neighborhood street. Warren strode confidently beside Erica, while Malik and Jaden darted playfully ahead. They moved as one unit, a family forged through pain but strengthened by truth and love. As they walked, Warren held Anthony's letter close in his memory. His friend's words echoed clearly. "Don't forget to smile." Looking at Erica and the boys, Warren did just that, his smile genuine and bright, full of hope for their shared future. If you enjoyed the story of Warren, Jaden, and Malik, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.